All right. So, as we know, the Super Bowl wrapped up on Sunday. The game was close, but the Chiefs exited overtime victorious 25-22. So I want to hear some of your great takes about Super Bowl. But first, let's hand out some grades for the final game of the NFL season.
Yeah, some grades. So you're going to see on all of these, I kind of follow the same pattern. We're going to talk about the San Francisco counterpart, then move over to Kansas City. We're going to start with the defense of the San Francisco 49ers. And I'll be honest, a lot of people might be hating a little bit on the 49ers for some of those late drives, but I had to give the 49ers a B+. They forced 5 fumbles during the game. They intercepted a pass from Patrick Mahomes. I think everybody knows how hard that is to do. The broadcast definitely made sure all the fans did. And I don't think we saw the same Patrick Mahomes as soon as that pick was gone, and then Patrick Mahomes retook the field on offense. It was a different Patrick. He was locked in. He was taking everything the defense gave him. Didn't really force anything, and just relied on him and Andy Reid to kind of eventually find a way to beat that defense. But I think Nick Bosa hit Mahomes 3 times. I don't think you could ask a lot more from a player. Fred Warner was everywhere. That's their who I think is probably the 49ers' top defensive player, and really stood out. Didn't have a bad game himself. Really stopped Mahomes and Reid rhythm early in that game, and especially the scripted plays in the first half. I think I expected in my head the Chiefs to get out to a little bit of an early lead, just getting off that hot start, using those Andy Reid cooked up plays. When he has multiple weeks, it's proven just how good he is, and I expected to see a little bit more of that, but I gave my hats off to that San Fran defense in that first half, because I felt like, yes, the Chiefs were able to move the ball a little bit, but of course those turnovers helped, and you're able to just keep slowing up on Patrick Mahomes and really kept Purdy in a pretty good spot to win that game throughout. So I gave the defense of San Fran a B+. What did you give them?
Yeah, I actually gave him a B. So through 60 minutes of regulation, the 49ers only allowed Kansas City to score 1 touchdown, and that touchdown came after the muffed punt that gave him the ball at the 16-yard line. I feel like Mahomes' rushing kind of destroyed the Niners. I'm thinking back to the 4th and 1 play in overtime. He also had a 19-yard scramble that led to game-winning points. That was just a couple plays later, but that's not enough to completely rag on defense. They still did a really good job. So. I give him a B.
Yeah, and just one of the harder things to judge about what San Francisco and their defense was able to do was, and especially Steve Wilks calling a great game plan. I think that was part of it. It's just that everything was in line as far as that San Francisco 49ers defense, especially in that first half. I do think they just kind of got worn down and tired towards the end, and that was when Patrick Mahomes was able to find those running rooms that just were not open earlier in the game. But 5 fumbles, yet I believe only one of those were actually recovered by San Francisco. 4 of them were recovered by the Chiefs, and that's a tough loss. That really is, because that's one of those numbers. Getting the fumble is a skill thing. Collecting the fumble can be completely just this wide open, random part of the game. And that part of the game went in the Chiefs' favor, I think much to the Chiefs' delight, because I think that with those extra turnovers that could have been created, could Purdy have gotten 3 on a possession? Could he have gotten 7 on a possession? The game would have looked a little bit different had San Fran had a little bit of a lead early on. That's the kind of one thing, but you can't really fault a defense for not collecting these fumbles. Moving on to the defense of Kansas City, and I am so excited to talk about the defense of Kansas City because it was led by and tackles, and I believe in quarterback hits by Nick Bolton. Nick Bolton is from Mizzou, was spectacular here at Mizzou, went pretty, was it late? I'm blinking a little bit here. It was late first round or early second round, but just made waves on this Kansas City Chiefs defense. And Steve Spagnuolo has got to be completely impressed and love to have this character day in, day out. And just in these big moments, these leaders step up and take their place. And I think Nick Bolton is one of those players that did that and kind of cements himself as the face of this new spectacular defense that didn't really have a name other than Chris Jones on it before the year began.
Yeah, one of my favorite sayings is that big time players make big time plays in big time games, and it seems like Bolton definitely did that last game.
Yeah, certainly. And I got to say, 13 tackles. He hit Purdy twice. But Trent McDuffie out of Washington was insane to me. And it's kind of watching the Super Bowl over is really hard to see how corners do, just because the camera's not on them until just that point when the ball kind of comes down into the apex of a catch. And so you don't get to see all the work that a corner does, but Trent McDuffie was doing all the work. And you could just tell, I mean, Deebo Samuel was held like in check for the entire game. You think about how much money the 49ers have dedicated to Deebo and what a weapon Deebo is. And then the Kansas City Chiefs were able to more or less take him and George Kittle out of the game. That credit has got to go to Steve Spagnuolo, but also Trent McDuffie, Nick Bolton, and the rest of that Kansas City defense. Like I said, if you can get two of another team's top players to really not contribute, that's a win. So for this Kansas City defense, I've got to give it an A+. They did exactly, I mean, you can take away an option, like a top 3 option, but taking away 2 of the top 3 options, to me, that's a definite win. I think the Kansas City Chiefs deserve an A+ for that effort.
So I gave him an A. I am just thinking back to highlights I remember from the game, and the one thing I remember is that they got kind of caught behind on that trick play. So that's what I'm thinking of. But other than that, there really weren't a whole lot of negatives that you could say about this defense. So I'm going with an A, but I can totally see your A+.
And what I like here as we move into the coaches section is just how much harder of a grader you are than I. And I think that's so clear. And I'm sure listeners can pick up on that as well. We move into the coaching. I'm going to start with Kyle Shanahan, and this may just be my roughest grade. And reports on ESPN are going to claim that there was an overtime plan that the 49ers had put in place before the playoffs, and they have never reviewed it up into the Super Bowl. And I don't feel like that would have been so big of an issue against pretty much any other team. But when you're going up against the brain trust of Andy Reid, Steve Spagnuolo, their GM, and Patrick Mahomes, I think you have to coach like it's the last game of your life just to compete with these guys. So if you leave any stone unturned, which I do believe that Kyle Shanahan did, then you're putting yourself at a real disadvantage, and you're accepting a real disadvantage. That's tough. You already knew Andy Reid is dominant off bye weeks. If you give him extra time for a game, he's going to bring a little bit of something extra to the game. And that's what happened. I just think that Andy Reid outcoached Kyle Shanahan. And I don't think that these teams had any real deficit between each other too much more than on the sidelines. I think that Andy Reid and what he was able to do late versus what Kyle Shanahan was attempting to do late, I think the biggest grade boost has to be between Andy Reid and Kyle Shanahan for how they conducted themselves in those moments. And I'm not going to bang on Kyle Shanahan as much as everybody else. He's clearly spectacular in the offensive coordinator role, but head coaching is a totally different thing. Andy Reid's been a head coach for a billion years now and has every step of that process just nailed down. So I can't find myself incredibly shocked that Andy Reid ended up kind of taking a huge advantage in that matchup.
Yeah, one thing I feel like I'm going to disagree with you here is and this might be pretty controversial, but I honestly think that Shanahan made the right decision to receive the kickoff or at the beginning of overtime. The Chiefs hadn't scored a touchdown all game when they had like the length of the field. I know he's getting hate for that decision. It seems really odd to me. Now, obviously, I don't know what happened. I wasn't there, but it seems really odd to me that they really just didn't review the overtime situation. I don't know. That just seems like too big of a stone unturned. But I gave him a C. I think he did a pretty good job. He got the team there. But he just once again couldn't get the job done.
Yeah, he has a heart. It's good to see Jake Aaron having a heart. Grading him a little bit higher than me, but that's okay. I think we saw pretty eye to eye on those things. Now, it's just simply a numbers thing because you got to think about it the opposite way. If you go down there and you score, well, now Patrick Mahomes has to go score a touchdown. That means it's 4-down territory throughout. It's not necessarily 4-down territory. If you give it to him first, you get a stop. And then it's kind of the ball's in your hand. I do think that the right move with the new rules is to go ahead and defer and kick off, see what their offense can do, and then match it. Because then can you use all 4 of those downs? Should you use all 4 of those downs? It makes sense to me, and I just wonder how dialed into this new overtimes rule Kyle Shanahan really was. How much time was really put into it? Did he put any time into it? Was that an assistant coach that he handed, that part of the game off to, and it kind of got lost by the wayside? Because it did feel like the Kansas City Chiefs were much more prepared post game going into overtime than the 49ers were. Yeah. That moves. Oh, did you have something? I was going to
say I agree with that.
Yeah.
Just something I saw is that he apparently referred to their analytics department. That was who he went to make that decision.
Interesting. Now we're talking about Andy Reid, and I'm going to change my entire tune because Andy Reid was spectacular throughout that game. And I'll be honest, I had a few questions because of just how much trouble the Chiefs were having early. And of course, it was the fumbles. I wasn't going to stress about that. If you're going, 5-6 plays and then you have a fumble, like, your offense was successful up until a point. And I feel like Andy Reid knew that, stayed real calm. And then what I grabbed the most from that entire game was a couple of screens he called in overtime, because it really wasn't a screen-heavy game up until that point. And then it was screen, 9, 8, 7, taking apart a defense that really was on their heels to begin with, just going into overtime. Then Andy Reid hitting them with a different tempo, a different play style, with a different end game in mind, with a different strategy in mind. I just don't think that the 49ers entered the extra I was going to say extra innings, but entered the extra time trying to think about how to get ahead of the Chiefs. It was more of like, okay, how do we go out there and play some more football? And I think the Chiefs went back to their sideline and said, okay, what can we throw at them now that they'll just never see coming? Like, where's our knockout punch? And I think that Andy Reid had that knockout punch loaded, sent it right down the pipes. And the other thing I want to call out here, and it's a little tough to do this here, I'm going to do this rather than talk about Patrick Mahomes. 2 of those touchdown passes were incredibly wide open. The first one to Kelsey, which I think a lot less people throughout the week have talked about, but that was a complete design touchdown as well. And then McCole Hardman catching the game-winning touchdown with nobody in his area code. To me, that should be given just as much credit to Andy Reid as it should be to Patrick Mahomes. Sticking with the game plan throughout, you never see the Chiefs panic. That has to also be a credit to Andy Reid. Hiring Spagnuolo has to be a big check in Andy Reid's cap to be able to be like, okay, I've got the offense. I'm comfortable with this. I'm going to turn the entire defense over to you, Spags, and we're going to see exactly what you can make it. And then, because they pay Patrick Mahomes because they want to pay a certain few guys, they can't pay others. It's the reality of the sport. Every team's dealing with the same thing, but Spags is able to kind of shoulder the load there. I know that Reid had to lose some wide receivers, namely Tyreek Hill, but also that defense took a few shots and lost a lot of good players. I can think of Tyrann Mathieu off the cuff right there, and just impact players, and then able to replace them cheaply has been an A-plus system throughout, just not even the Super Bowl. Andy Reid, Spagnuolo, the Kansas City Chiefs, A-plus throughout. They're the only team that can claim they've had a better season than the Houston Texans so far. So, hey. All right. I am interested to hear what you have that take on Andy Reid.
Yeah, so continuing, I guess, my streak of being heartless, I gave Andy Reid an A. So there's one play that's heartless. There was one play that stuck out to me, and that I feel like we would be talking about a lot more if the Chiefs had lost. So Travis Kelce caught a 9-yard pass at the Chiefs about 2-yard line. But it appeared that they didn't exactly give him the spot, which led to 3rd and 1, I believe. Andy Reid called a timeout there, but he called the timeout to draw up the next play as opposed to challenging that field position. The Chiefs didn't end up getting the first down there, and they had to punt. They won. So obviously that's mostly forgotten, but I feel like that would have been talked about a lot more had they not won, considering that they had to punt, and I feel like they would have gotten the spot. So that's why I give him an A. But hindsight's 20/20. I think other than that, he did a very, very good job leading this Chiefs team once again.
An extremely tough grader here, just giving Andy Reid an A, not an A+. I won't take it personally. We're moving into the quarterbacks. Let's go ahead and start with the San Fran quarterback, Brock Purdy. And before I speak, I actually just want to hear your thoughts. What grade did you give Brock Purdy, and why did you give it to him?
I gave Brock Purdy a B. He played conservatively. which is fine. I feel like he kind of tried to let the defense win the game, so to speak. His receivers struggled to get open a little bit, which is fine. That's not on him. I like that he didn't really force too many passes, but he didn't play well enough to get the win. Like I said, I think he did play kind of conservatively. I would have liked to see a little more aggression from him, just a little bit. Maybe it would have been a different outcome, but I give him a B. What about you?
I gave Brock Purdy a B+. Now, and I have to say, I had my doubts about Brock Purdy going in, and my measurement was, of course, like everybody else, Jimmy Garoppolo. Like, yes, but Jimmy Garoppolo got the 49ers that looked quite similar to the Super Bowl. So is Brock Purdy much different from a skills standpoint? And despite the loss, I came away thinking Brock Purdy is so much more different than Jimmy Garoppolo. You got to understand how different these two players were in their career leading up into their first Super Bowl. Like Jimmy Garoppolo had been around for quite some time as, a player sitting behind Tom Brady going to Super Bowls, and then gets to be the kind of guy. He had like a very natural, very healthy progression into being a starting quarterback for a very good team. And I just wasn't impressed with what he was able to do in the biggest moments. That's my breakdown of Jimmy Garoppolo. But then when I looked at Brock Purdy and you see a young guy drafted the very last pick of the draft, and yet I saw a ton more composure. I saw better throw decisions. And I didn't see all the throws that I love to see, but I'm not so caught up to reality here. I remember Jimmy Garoppolo in 2019, and I can tell you that I am much more comfortable with Brock Purdy throwing the ball for my team than I would be for Jimmy Garoppolo, and his throw selection as well. I just think that Brock Purdy sees things in a better way than Jimmy Garoppolo does, definitely faster than he does as well. So, and it wasn't the greatest game for him. But I don't see that as entirely on him. In fact, I put a little bit on Shanahan as well. If you have two different weapons, two of your top weapons that just aren't getting any sort of traction in your game, by the third quarter, it needs to be an SOS. It needs to be, okay, we pay that guy this much because we think he's this valuable to our team. Right now, we are either not using that valuable, that invaluableness, or they're no longer valuable. And I don't think that the issue is that Deebo Samuel and George Kittle are by the wayside. I don't think that that's the situation there. I just don't think they were put in tremendous spots to succeed. And if Kyle Shanahan is what everybody wants to anoint him to be, which is one of the best, if not the best young coach in the league, then I think there's got to be more in these situations. And I think there's got to be more creativity from his spot in big moments, because I think Brock Purdy did exactly kind of what you would expect from a guy in his first Super Bowl and his second playoff run and his second, third year in the league. It's insane. And then just the spot that he was in, which was very undercovered in this entire Super Bowl event, was just the Brock Purdy situation. The fact that he was going up against what is likely the GOAT quarterback and the likely maybe the GOAT coach, and he has great things, but it's so young. It's so young in his career. It's just a lot to put on anybody, especially the last pick in the draft just a few years ago. So I gave him a B+, but that moves us into Patrick Mahomes. Now, I gave Patrick Mahomes an A-. Could I give him an A with an interception, though? Because if I could, I probably would. These quarterbacks, nobody's like Patrick Mahomes. And when I say these quarterbacks, I mean a very select two quarterbacks, Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes. The understanding of how the game should be played, and then playing it to a T, not just in the first quarter, not the second quarter, not just a third quarter, and then maybe 5 minutes into the fourth, and then if things aren't going right, they panic. Just the ability to play mistake-free football when it's time, to turn it on, is incredible. That's the one thing that those two quarterbacks share, and they're best. Their close and intermediate passing ranges are their accuracy is exceptional. Yet it's also just knowing when to take your risks, when not to take your risks, and when to just let the other team beat themselves. And I really do think that Patrick Mahomes, after that interception, went out there and just said, I'm going to make all the plays they give me. If this comes down to 1 to 2 plays, I think from then on, Patrick Mahomes was extremely confident that those two plays were going to be in his favor and not in the 49ers' favor. And it really did just come down to a few plays all night. And that's what I don't understand. There's so many people saying, hey, this game isn't really good. And especially some people that were around us, a little boring was the thought process. But I loved every bit of it, honestly. I thought it was neck and neck. I thought at first San Fran was controlling the lines of scrimmages, and I felt that I still thought that Patrick Mahomes was playing a great game up until the point. I know there were fumbles all over the place. Even the interception, it was like, ouch. That hurts. But I wasn't worried at any point that Kansas City wasn't going to be able to climb back from the deficits they were putting themselves at. And I think as it came into the third and fourth quarter, just kind of expecting the Chiefs to win, it was like, well, I don't think the 49ers have done enough. At every point, it was like, 49ers should have more points here because it's almost Chiefs time. And when it's Chiefs time, and when I mean Chiefs time, I mean it's Patrick Mahomes time. And as soon as it turned on, it was a totally different game. So for Patrick Mahomes, part of his credit should be attributed to that play and calling. Like I said, 2 of his touchdown passes, both to Kelsey and Hardman, and the Kelsey one is talked about a lot less, just were major space. There was just nobody in the area code. So yeah, I think that breaks down each one of those grades, but I have a few other takes there. And the first one, I'm going to start hot. We're going special teams here because that is the one area we did not really talk about. Harrison Butker. I think he can take the spot as the best kicker in the NFL now, and I don't think that take shows any steam. I think that's a solid pick now. I know that the Ravens and Justin Tucker had held on to that for quite some time, but I just can't see anybody else being a more consistent and a better long-range kicker than Harrison Butker.
Yeah, the kick he made, was it 57?
It was long. Yeah, it was 54, 55, 56, 57.
It was very, very impressive. It was very impressive, and I think he really cemented himself as one of the best right now.
And has had a solid year. One of the best year as well. It's not like he didn't have a campaign before the playoffs. This isn't like some crazy reaction to one game or just the playoffs. All year, he's been the best kicker in the league. It's just not covered enough, but definitely has kind of shown himself to be the top guy. And with that, the similarities between the Patriots dynasty and the current Chiefs dynasty really begin to show, don't they? Best kicker, I've heard that before. Best quarterback, I've heard that before. Best short intermediate pass game, Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady, I've heard that before. Best head coach, best head coaching mind, I've heard that before. You know what? And the smartest head coach combo, quarterback combo, we've heard it before. But there's one thing that this Chiefs team has that potentially makes them better than the Patriots dynasty. And that's the coaching dynamic of these teams, right? It was all led by Belichick. Now, Belichick had a little bit of this as well, but even more so with Andy Reid being able to work with Patrick Mahomes one-on-one and just create these amazing offenses and just these intelligent offenses, these well-run offenses that always seem to get their stuff right. Even this year when it was doubted, by week 6, week 7, the Chiefs were back to really winning games at a solid rate as they have been. This year there was a few stumbles, but nothing really that held the Chiefs down. Nobody thought the Chiefs weren't going to make it into the playoffs. It's not like they fell majorly throughout the year. The Chiefs have just been what the Patriots were, but the Chiefs have this awesome marriage between Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, but they also have Spagnuolo, who's not going to be a head coach anytime soon. And in fact, after the Super Bowl, I wanted to almost pitch, should Spagnuolo be a head coach? Because he's clearly one of the best coordinators in the game. Now, not all head coaches or coordinators should be head coaches. It's not the same job, and I certainly understand that. And you talked about the extension that the Chiefs rightfully gave Steve Spagnuolo, but I mean, that little trio right there, that nucleus, let's call it a nucleus. I like the word nucleus for this conversation. That nucleus is something that is stronger than the Patriots had. And if it can stay together, which is, I mean, we've talked about Andy Reid possibly retiring and all these different things, but if that nucleus can stay together, I think this Chiefs team could possibly overshadow that Patriots dynasty. Because right now, if we want to talk about it, if we're doing like a little goats race and we're taking Patrick Mahomes back and putting him where Tom Brady was at the same age, I think Patrick Mahomes would have a little bit, if not a sizable lead at this moment in that GOAT debate. What would you say about that?
I don't know about that. I mean, I think it would be close. I don't know about a huge lead though. I do have a question for you. What do you think is the one thing that could potentially ruin what the Chiefs has right now? Could it be Andy Reid retiring?
Andy Reid retiring would 100% send this entire dynasty talk into a totally different direction. And I'm not sure it would be a direction that they would want to, that would be a good direction. I don't think it could be a good direction. I don't think you can go from a head coach like that. Well, what else is out there? I mean, technically this year there's better coaches than ever, but there's still not an Andy Reid out there. You're not going to find one. Yeah, I mean, it's, I think Kelsey's expendable, honestly. I don't think you can lose Mahomes. I don't think outside of that nucleus, anybody could go except for the general manager. I think the general manager we can add into that nucleus. But as long as that stature, that intelligence, that unidirectional front office stays together, that nucleus stays together, it's keep Patrick Mahomes, let the coaches figure out the rest of the roster, do the best you can, set up your guys as best you can, especially if you're Brett Veach, and let this team run. Because if you can keep that nucleus together, I don't think there's any part outside of that you could take away from this Chiefs team that they wouldn't suddenly be, this different team. All right. I think that ends the very first segment of our show. We are going to send it to a quick break. You're listening to KCOU 88.1. This is the Blake and Jake Show.